Reading the yearbook. What our statistics tell us about the world we live in. Hi, my name is David Ewart. I retired as a United Church minister about 3 years ago. And about 5 years before that, I started making slides of United Church of Canada yearbook data as a way to understand my experience of the United Church since the mid-1960s. I have 2 slides of yearbook data I want to show you, but before I do that, I want to set the context. Many years ago, when I worked as a systems analyst with the government of Manitoba, I became aware that if we didn't ask the right questions, we ended up trying to solve the wrong problems. Which is another way of saying that if we only focused on the immediate issue without a correct understanding of the whole context, no matter how hard we worked, nor how creative our solutions, we never achieved the results we were aiming for. Which is another way of saying we ended up feeling that we had wasted a lot of time, money, and effort. And expending time, money, and energy on efforts that do not bear fruit often leads to the fatigue and complacency of, well, we've done that before. This presentation will help you understand why past efforts at revitalizing your congregation may not have had the hoped-for long-term results. It will help you to stop trying to solve the wrong problems, and will help you get working on what may be the more daunting task of responding to the new culture in which we live. The church does not exist in a vacuum. It exists within a society, and today's world just does not do much of what we in the church take for granted. Let's take a look at a few of the things that have come to be common in our world today. Let's begin by thinking about how the world we live in has changed in the past decades. How did this piece of technology change our world? The development of recording technology, beginning in the 1800s, meant that for the first time in human history, it was no longer necessary to be in the same room at the same time as the musicians. Music became a non-local experience. We could listen to it at any time, anywhere, and at the time and place of our own choosing. The ability to record sound and images has had a profound impact on music, theater, and the church. But a record is not the same thing as the musicians. This record is not the Doors. So instead of listening to an actual performance, having a direct experience, the music is mediated through the technology of the record. A few years ago, this technology, the touchscreen phone, added a whole new dimension to our world. Whereas the record still required us to at least be in the same room as the record to hear the music, the internet-connected cell phone removed this limitation. A cell phone allows us to hear music from around the globe, wherever we are. We carry the globe in our hand, pocket, or purse. Smartphones and tablets are also two-way devices. They allow us to be globally interactive. When I sign on to Facebook, I am instantly able to connect to the billion other people who are also on Facebook, and they can connect with me. Smartphones and tablets also introduced a whole new way of interacting with technology, the touchscreen, which primarily trains us to use sight and touch to interact with our world. Touch has created a whole new form of physical interaction with the interface. Eye-hand coordination become the paramount senses. And this form of interacting with the technology creates a whole new level of intimacy, of personal and physical involvement. So much so that people report feeling lost or naked without their touchscreen phone or tablet. In fact, let's start calling this new space the touchscreen space. Somewhat paradoxically, even though I am now interactively connected to the globe, because my experience and connections are mediated and non-local, I operate in this space as an isolated individual. And so my sense of where authority lies is that it is within myself. I have unfettered authority to act in this space as I choose. My imagination and expectations are shaped by this space. Within this space, my hopes for the future typically use sight, vision, as the chief metaphor. This vision, of course, is always personal and individual. It is my vision. Achieving any sense of our vision is often fleeting and fragile. For example, unlike any other time in history, this new media allows spontaneous flash mobs to form. But can it create long-term commitment to collective action? Not so much. Okay, so how do our congregations function? Well, are they not local? Being part of a congregation still means being in the room, the same room, at the same time as everyone else. Just like we had to do 125 years ago if we wanted to hear music. Being local means that the experience we have is direct, unmediated. For better or worse, the preacher is in the room talking to us and watching us. The congregation's connections are primarily to the neighborhood. Of course, larger congregations may extend to the immediate region as well. And when you come to worship, the experience is pre-structured. Someone else has pretty much picked all the words that you will sing, speak, pray, and listen to. And the primary senses for communication are speaking and hearing. The way of being in this church space teaches me that authority is located outside of myself, in the Bible, in God, Jesus, or the church. My imagination and expectations are shaped by this space, and my hopes for the future are formed by looking outside of myself, or rather, not so much looking as listening for a call. The world of the touchscreen forms us to be autonomous individuals. The world of the congregation forms us to be a covenant community. Now, in the world of the church, there are roughly 3 populations or 3 conversations about this new age of the touchscreen space. The first group are tourists. If you are over 60, you probably belong to this group. And those of us who are tourists dabble in this touchscreen space. We visit the popular destinations and use them to enrich our experience. We Google, we email, we may Facebook, Skype, and blog. We research our next trip and book flights and hotels. But we really live offline. We locate ourselves in the here and now. And in our experience, there is no problem going back and forth between these 2 spaces. If you are part of this group, you are probably thinking this whole presentation has been boring. What's the point of all this? What's the problem? The second group are immigrants. I'm guessing that most of us between 40 and 60 might be immigrants to this touchscreen space. We have become more or less fluent. We know the side roads and local thoroughfares of this space. We live here. We not only consume content, we create it. And we know the true costs of creating content, the financial investment needed in technology, skill, and expertise, and especially the time needed to create the content for a touchscreen space. But every once in a while, we too get lost. And we can still remember another time and place we once called home. But we also know there is no going back. And we know there are significant issues in providing portals from the touchscreen space to our church. If you are part of this group, everything I have said so far is making perfect sense to you. And you may be thinking, I wish everyone on my church board could hear this. The third group are natives to the touchscreen space. Those of us who are natives live in this touchscreen space. We move freely from app to app, We don't think of ourselves as either consuming or providing content. We are connecting and sharing. We live in the touchscreen space and are a tourist in the church space. We take in the popular events, Christmas Eve and Easter, and we go along with a parent or a spouse or a friend to other highlights, a wedding perhaps, or maybe a concert. But we don't live here. We don't really speak the language or live the lifestyle. You know you are a native if everything I have said so far is boring. If you are thinking, yeah, so? In my experience, there are very few touchscreen natives in our church space who are actually over the age of 20. Now, the fact that there are three populations about the touchscreen space means that our conversation within our church is very disconnected. Two of the populations don't see that there is even any problem. So it is difficult to establish any form of serious engagement with this reality and engender sustained traction responding to this new space. Consequently, our efforts become hit and miss, and it is difficult to maintain momentum, which leads, once more, to inevitable fatigue and burnout. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt, the books, and the scars. But the touchscreen space is here to stay. It is the present and future space in which we must be the church. So let's pause a second and take a good look again at this slide and ask the question, what happens when someone from this touchscreen space walks into our church? That's right. The answer is fewer and fewer people from the touchscreen space are walking into our church. As you can see from this chart, weekly worship attendance has declined by 50% in 25 years, from slightly over 400,000 in 1985 to 175,000 in 2010. And if nothing happens to change the trend of the past 10 years, worship attendance will plunge by 80% in the next 15 years to be 25,000 in the year 2025. 25,000 is the number of people who went to church each week in Maritime Conference in 2010. In only 15 years, that could be the number for all of Canada. This dramatic decline in weekly worship attendance is happening because there is just too big a disconnect between the touchscreen space and our church. And this is not because we are doing something wrong. This is not our fault. This is not a problem that can be fixed by jazzing up what we do. The culture in which we are being the church has developed a different ethos, a different way of imagining and connecting that is not in harmony with the way we imagine and connect. When fewer people go to church, there are significant consequences. Congregations become smaller and fewer. As can be seen from this chart, the number of congregations with weekly worship attendance of more than 250 declined by 80% in the past 12 years, from 155 in 1999 to 27 in 2011. These larger congregations declined and became medium ones, but still the total number of medium congregations also declined by 20%, from 764 to 632. But congregations are tenacious. They become smaller, but they do not close. And so we are becoming a denomination of small congregations. Taking a closer look at small one-point charges, we can see the dramatic increase that have taken place in the very small and the medium small congregations from 1999 to 2011. In fact, congregations of 50 or fewer now make up 40% of all one-point pastoral charges. These charts help us to understand the critical importance of the changes we have all been experiencing over the past 5 decades. And as we ponder our future, we must consider a hard truth that environmental science teaches us. When the environment changes, organisms must change or die. The rate of decline of weekly worship attendance is simply not sustainable. This will have significant impacts on our church budgets, buildings, and payroll. Congregations need to start planning now for a future of fewer people, fewer buildings, and fewer staff. Because these changes are primarily driven by the culture we live in, we cannot fix the problems the changed culture creates for us. Develop different responses to these changes in the culture? Yes. But fix these changes? No. There is no going back to the good old days when church attendance was normal in our society. In addition to all the good work that is being done to help us make internal changes to help improve the health of congregations, problems that can be fixed if we choose to, we desperately need much more creative, collective, shared thinking about developing new ways of responding to the changed culture in which we live. With the exception of the few remaining larger congregations, the impacts of the changes to the culture in which we live are too big for each and every congregation to successfully respond to. The culture in which we live will not provide the inputs that congregations need to thrive: sufficient people and money to pay the bills, to keep the building maintained, to staff the volunteer ministries that we have. Our infrastructure of buildings and payroll was built for another age, and smaller congregations especially need to experiment with new ways to be the church without buildings and with reduced or no payroll. Because the changes in the culture in which we live are too big for each congregation to deal with on their own, we are going to have to develop a spirit of regional cooperation that transcends our past of congregational independence. There is no single future plan or model that will work for all congregations. Our largest congregations have to respond to this new context in ways that are completely different than our smallest congregations. And similarly, our smallest congregations can and must respond in ways that our largest ones should not even think about. But I believe that no one really knows now what will work, what the surefire do this and thrive solution is. And so we must support each other to experiment with the widest possible variety of responses. Looking at this slide again, we have to begin asking new questions about how our church can be sustained within this growing touchscreen space. And for every question, we have to ask, can we transition our tradition into this new space? Or, how do we transition natives from the touchscreen space into our church traditions? For example, if God is indeed present in all times and in all spaces, just how is the Word made flesh in the touchscreen space? How does the Word become manifest in this space? Clearly, the Word cannot become flesh. So, what texts, for example, do we find in this space which we could read during a season of Epiphany? Or alternatively, what is the portal from the touchscreen space into our church space that provides the context, meaning, and impact of becoming flesh for a touchscreen native? Surely a mark of the church as we know it is that we congregate. Jesus has said that where 2 or 3 gather together in His name, He is with us. Just what does that look like in touchscreen space? Or, alternatively, what is the portal from touchscreen space into church space that provides the context, meaning, and impact for full frontal bonding in real time? And just to make the issue more visceral, How do we celebrate communion in a touchscreen space? How do we share bread and wine? Or, alternatively, what is the portal from the touchscreen space into our church space that provides the context, meaning, and impact of rooting the present future by remembering the past? How do we ritually enact new life, new identity in Christ in the touchscreen space? Or, again, alternatively, what is the portal from the touchscreen space into church space that provides the context, meaning, and impact of being marked with a new family of origin? I ask these questions to try and emphasize how the physicality of the things we take for granted in the church creates complex and novel issues for being the church in a touchscreen space. You will have other questions and have other responses, but here are a few of mine just to continue to spark the conversation. There is no single future that we can all embark on together. For example, there may be enough similarities between our largest congregations that it might make some sense for them to share ideas, but it makes no sense whatsoever for our smallest congregations to imagine that their future will look anything like the larger ones. There is also a vast gulf between the realities faced by rural congregations compared to urban ones. We desperately need to become colleagues in diversity. The recent spate of resources on revitalizing congregations are all doomed to fail if mission is undertaken as a strategy for survival. If the church is to be an icon of God's love for the world, then it must love the world as God does. And God does not love the world in order to survive. God loves the world for the world's own sake, totally for the world's own good, without hesitation and without any thought of payoff or return. The church must do the same and separate its survival anxiety from its love for its neighbors. Separating mission from survival will require the courage to plan to live smaller and more authentically. Whatever appeal our congregations will have to the touchscreen space, it will primarily be that we provide an authentic alternative of a local, face-to-face, spiritual, and religious community. The future will not be static. It will require non-stop adjusting, creativity, and reinventing of ourselves. Our planning and decision-making will need to be nimble and winsome. I believe one of the things that gives new life is to never cease telling self-correcting stories. That's why the Bible continues to be such a source of inspiration. We are not the first to find ourselves in a wilderness, to feel like we are in a strange land, to wonder how to sing the Lord's song in a new space. But we also need to be careful that we don't tell stories that are mere nostalgia. I don't believe that our best days are behind us, but I also know that our future will not be anything like our past or even our present. Finally, let me finish with two pieces of wisdom that I find encouraging. Second, Isaiah knew the desolation of being uprooted and being placed in unfamiliar territory. Unlike Isaiah, we haven't been physically relocated. Instead, we have become exiles in our own land, in our own homes. But like Isaiah, we still have the same God who speaks and calls to us. Is not the touchscreen space a new thing? And finally, let us remember that embracing the new is our founding heritage as the United Church of Canada. Well, I'd love to hear your responses to this presentation, or even better, meet with you and your congregation to talk about what this might mean for you. So please get in touch with me. My email address is david@davidewart.ca. Permission is granted for nonprofit use of these materials, in whole or in part, provided the source is acknowledged as David Ewart, www.davidewart.ca.